Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, the D's have stumbled at the first hurdle. However, the equation remains the same as it was last week. Win the next 3 games and we win the flag. How we achieve that is something we'll attempt to find out tonight. And joining me tonight to help dissect the loss is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Bimman. Good evening to all our listeners. Well, we've got questions about the side now. We've got more questions about the injuries, and we've got lots of questions from our listeners. But do we have the answer? Let's see if we can find out.
Well, we certainly do have a lot of questions from our listeners, and also joining us tonight to help answer those questions and analyse what we need to do to pick up the pieces and get back on the horse is Demonland's resident tactician, Binman. Sorry, Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Yes, one of the very significant downsides of being as confident as I was coming into this game is the sinking feeling in that last quarter as I came to the realisation we weren't going to win that game. And, it took me. It's taken me a while to get back to a equilibrium, I must say, and just humoured me a little bit after the game. I was in a state of funk would be probably the best way to describe it. And unusually, I decided to, instead of walking to the city, which is how I normally get home from the G and get a train from the city, I decided to walk to Richmond. So that was mistake 1, Richmond station, because it was just chaos. I just couldn't get to the platform. When I finally got to the platform, there was a police incident at Flinders Street, which meant no trains were going into Flinders Street and no trains were going out of Flinders Street. So it was pandemonium. And then I'm standing there, a whole bunch of people sort of asking for selfies with this fella. And it turns out it's Jordan Lewis. And so I'm standing next to Jordan Lewis. And to his internal credit, he was really patient with people asking for selfies, and I thought I was quite impressed. And I thought to myself, at least it's not David King. Anyway, the time clicks past, 25 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes on the station full of joyous Swans fans, and who walks up the ramp? But David King. I was thinking to myself, I hope I don't see David King after seeing Geordie Lewis, thinking, because he was right and I was wrong. And I could not have been more wrong about the finals. In fact, I thought they would be quite a bit of a damn squib with only the one close game. I got that right, which was Richmond. I got that game right, was Richmond Lions being a close game, but the rest were terrific, including our game. I mean, it was a hard pill to swallow. But I have to also say, to David King's credit, there was a Melbourne fan who pigeonholed him, and David King was really terrific with him and patient, and he was standing right next to me, and his sort of theme was how ferocious and how incredibly ruthless and ferocious the tackling and energy was of the Swans. And I guess we'll talk about that tonight. But their pressure was off the charts. So, David, if you're listening, which is unlikely, but you were right on this game, and credit to you for taking the time to be patient with the D's fan who asked his opinion.
Well, actually, joining us now is David King to accept your apology. Good evening, David.
Yes, wow.
Well, let's get straight into it because we do have a lot of questions from the listeners. We'll do our usual match wrap up, and I guess the word of the night was pressure, and Sydney brought the pressure, and the D's just had no answer for it. This is not a new phenomenon for the Melbourne Football Club of 2022. There have been at least 5 matches now where another team has played a man-on-man style of game and brought immense pressure to the contest, and the D's have folded twice against the Pies, against the Blues, perhaps against the Hawks earlier in the season, and now twice against the Swans, and there were some mitigating circumstances in some of those games. But the other night, a host of Demon players were simply not able to stand up to the pressure, and subsequently were about to execute. We're not able to execute in a manner befitting finals footy. At times, we did look slick, but once again, we weren't able to hold a lead and play 4 quarters of footy. Sydney's pressure was immense, as evidenced by belting us in the tackles 84-70. Tackles inside 50 were 25-13. 1%ers 68-55, and the fact that they scored 70 points of their 91 points from turnovers. Melksham, Neil Bullen, and Hunt all wilted under the pressure, and all 3 of them should be very worried about their position in the team. Unfortunately, we have seen the reward that such efforts get, and that's another game. However, we simply can't afford to keep rewarding poor skills, poor execution, and poor efforts. And despite the praise that we heaped on the team for our ability to score in a variety of different ways in the final match of the home and away season, the D's reverted to type and either kicked deep into the forward pocket or just bombed the ball in. Our forward connection was at its worst, despite the 6 more inside 50s and 4 more marks inside 50s that we had. We've been banging on about this for weeks, but resting our ruckman in the forward line just isn't working and is not bearing any fruit. Neither Gawn nor Jackson took a mark in our forward 50, and the only goal from the 2 of them came from a free kick. Neither of them provide the same forward craft that T-Mac provides in terms of blocking, bringing the ball to ground, providing defensive pressure when the ball hits the deck. And we'll talk a bit more later on about the forward liners. We've got lots of questions in that regard, but it's safe to say that we need another tall, non-ruck option down there. Fritsch is good for a couple of goals, but if Pickett doesn't fire, we simply don't have the tall options in the team to assist Ben Brown, who gets double and triple teamed. And I won't get ahead of myself, but if we face Geelong in a prelim, he will be eaten alive without another tall option to assist against their defence. The contest in the middle was struck a massive blow when Petrarca copped a heavy knock in the first, limiting his output for the rest of the match. Clary more than stood up to hold his own and also put through 2 goals, but the rest of the mids were quiet, whilst Luke Parker ran riot, especially when the game was on the line in the second quarter. Gawn and Jackson were overshadowed in the ruck by Tom Hickey, with Jackson only taking 1 mark and having 7 possessions. And likewise, Gawn didn't have his best night, and despite some good marking, his disposal massively let us down. Our usually miserly defence was full of holes, and the only shining light was Stephen May, who absolutely destroyed Buddy Franklin once again. Maisie had 23 touches, 7 marks, an incredible 16 intercepts, and 583 metres gained. The amount of turnovers in defence was putrid. In fact, we had a high amount of turnovers from a number of players across the field. Brayshaw 11, Viney 9, Gawn 7, Petty 7, Lever 6, Hibbard 6. This is what pressure does to a team. We need to be able to combat that type of heat, but there are other teams left in the competition, including the Swans, who know how to bring it. We're now into sudden death. We've beaten our next opponent twice already this season by an average margin of 10 goals. Will we repeat history? Will we make any changes? Will the Lions have done their homework and learned their lessons from the past? Time will tell. Gentlemen, any other comments regarding the game, keeping in mind any questions we've got coming up? Big man?
Yeah, I mean, we'll cover a lot of what I was sort of thinking about actually in the questions, which is interesting. And, you know, it's just really interesting. Pressure was obviously a huge factor, and there seems to be 2 models of football evolving. And I know George was going to touch on it, so I might follow your lead, George, because and I'm interested in the intersections a little bit. But just on the game itself, I mean, in the second quarter, I couldn't, and the second half of the third quarter, that's the most fumbles that I can recall Melbourne doing under pressure for a long, long time now. Clearly their pressure was fantastic, but some of the errors, and Goody again, he was a very unhappy man in that presser, and he made the point 3 times about execution. And there were some super frustrating ones in that third quarter, missing handball chains where it wasn't really so much their, I mean, maybe it was referred pressure, but just mistakes. It rained. If viewers watching at home wouldn't have seen it because it looked absolutely perfect.
Just
but
before,
it rained, for about 20 minutes till about 10 minutes before the game. So
it was
just enough to put,
it was a light rain. It wasn't that heavy.
No, but just enough to make it greasy, which, I mean, they didn't, they were brilliant. Their ball handling was brilliant and their kicking for goals was brilliant. As I said on the podcast last week, they've got some brilliant kicks, and that really, to be honest, the difference in skill level was really evident, particularly on the kicking front. But just a comment on, I'm not sure whether one of the questions cover it, but I saw track that incident happen. And I had my binoculars on him for big parts of the game at different times. He could barely get out of a jog for pretty much from that point on. And there was one point where he motioned to come off the ground, and I was sitting on that side, so almost directly above the interchange bench. And he had to come back on. He came off finally. He got waved off, and then had to come on in about 3-4 minutes. And he was limping to come off. This is in the third quarter, and he was limping just as heavily to come back on. It was ridiculous. I could not understand why they didn't bring Smith on, because one, we needed his energy, but two, of course, track, there's an argument, a half-fit track in the middle, but he wasn't really being effective. And the thing is that, he was at like some 41% effective disposal, which was woeful. He was getting no depth, but he was offering us no run. So we were essentially one player down out of our rotations in terms of ability to cover ground. And if you add into that also Spargo, he was hospitalised. I didn't realise that until I read in Demonland. He got a chop to the neck, to the throat, and had to go to hospital. Fritsch hurt his knee directly before the game. At one point, Gawn was running directly to me, and I said to my mate that I was sitting with, Gawn, he's done his hammy, because he looked like he was running so awkwardly. He was desperately trying to get the ball over the boundary and running to a contest, but his running gait looked really weird, and I thought for sure he'd done his hammy. He hadn't, obviously, because he played on. And, apparently also Melksham was carrying something. My point being really is that those injuries, were obviously pretty significant, but Trax was the biggest one. And I understand Goody's approach, and I'll back it in. He's got the runs on the board, but geez, I was just gobsmacked that right from the moment it happened, actually, I was gobsmacked Smith didn't come on because, for one thing, we needed his run, but the other factor was that he would have been able to be put down forward and provide that second tall option that we so desperately needed. So it was a frustrating game to watch on a number of levels, but that really burnt my bacon, having a fit, firing athlete sitting on the bench and not coming on. So yeah, I'd be interested in your guys' views on that decision.
It was a little bit bewildering. I could understand for a start off why they wouldn't bring him on because it was so early in the game, but by the time you get to half time and he's not getting any better, you really got to question, what's the value being achieved out of him. I remember when Petrarca was kicking, he'd got a free or a mark or something. He was right on the 50-metre line kicking for goal. Not long after he was kicked in the leg, and he couldn't make the distance. And
he didn't even look likely on that kick, did he?
Yeah, for a guy who's supremely powerful and certainly getting the distance is no problem to him. That was a real indictment. So I can understand why they might wait for a little while to see whether you can run it out. Or,
exactly.
And you don't want to make your sub too early in case something more dramatic occurs. But after that, you do have to question it. But I still question all this stuff about the forward line. I just cannot understand why, for example, we're starting with Jackson in the ruck, Max Gawn at full forward, and Ben Brown on the bench.
Well, I mean, I think
it just seems silly to me. Yeah,
that was weird, but I think Maxi's carrying something. No, I reckon the two factors with him playing forward. One, he's obviously carrying something. Like as I said, his running gait when he was running towards me, I said to my mate straight away, he's done his hammy. It was so unusual the way he was running. And secondly, he's down there because we don't have that second tall down there. So in a way, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I suspect it's more about he's carrying an injury, and so. He's not a forward in any sense of the word. And in fact, arguably, I mean, liability is probably a bit over the top as a forward. But, I mean, he's 7 foot almost. So the ball hits the deck, he's going to struggle. Yeah. And Ben Brown also looked a bit banged up. Yeah. It's interesting because of that philosophy. They had a full practice match during the middle of the week. Now, we did the same thing last year, and that's our model. But we had some banged up players coming into that match, and you wonder whether, I mean, we saw on 360 last week, Track got a hit to the head, and he had a cut on his lip from that game. So obviously it's a pretty fierce game. So, it was like, I agree, George. It was him up forward. I think that's really probably the logic behind it, or maybe the driver of it. But the number one thing it really did in this game is it took away our strength in the ruck, because Jackson also doesn't look in great nick and is carrying a bit of a knee injury apparently, and certainly his bandage didn't seem to have his normal zip. So, we've got the best ruck in the league, and he's only rucking, I think he was 60-odd% in this game, wasn't it? So
yeah. Still, all credit to Sydney. Their pressure around the ball in particular at all times and across the whole field, not just their midfield, was just exceptional.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Absolutely.
It was fantastic.
And it absolutely not only opened us up, but exposed those, players who are sort of at the margins so easily, because it just... by putting the pressure on them, you suddenly find out why they haven't been in the side, or they've been dropped in the past. It's because they can't kick the ball under pressure. They can't.
It exacerbates the skills.
And that's obviously what really upset Goodwin. In his interview, he made, like you just said, our fundamentals and basics were off because of the Sydney pressure. Sydney were more efficient. They really pressure well. He was particularly critical of turnovers 3 times in the third quarter, which resulted in goals to Sydney.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that in a sec to one of the questions. But I mean, what they do really well, the Swans, it's interesting. I was thinking that it's almost like a new sort of style in the way it is that really pressuring not giving up contested ball. One of the really interesting features of this game and the Geelong-Collingwood game was continuing the trend of both teams being down in contested possessions. And I couldn't find the post-clearance contested possessions. And I think it was Watson 11 on Demonland did some work to try and work it out. But essentially, Sydney were ahead in the post-clearance possessions, which gelled with what I saw now, this sort of that notion of really pressuring, losing the contested possession, keeping in mind they bring an extra to the stoppage, and then pressuring the outlet kick. Well, that's sort of, as someone pointed out, I think Lucifer's Hero pointed out, well, that's not exactly new, because that's what clubs were doing to us when we had multiple players, so-called, bees to the honeypot type thing. But what is a bit different is that it's not just in that immediate ring around the stoppage that happens. They're positioning players with some depth from the contest and winning that next contest. And I wonder whether that sort of feature that I've noted a few times during the year of us doing long handballs to clear that is a way of trying to address that post-clearance stuff that we're getting hurt on. And it's those teams that Andy mentioned, Collingwood, Blues to a lesser extent, Collingwood and definitely the Swans, who seem to be playing this model that is so much based on pressure. Like, it's old school one-on-one to a degree. The other thing is, for me in that game, is those two styles of coaching that I've talked about, the system-based one and then a system with much more sort of tactical fluidity, looking to address teams' weaknesses and strengths, and Longmire is much more of that category. And I thought he did a brilliant job coaching. They put time into Salem, and they put time into Langdon, and they put time into Lever, which was really clever, because all three players are critical to our ability to transition the ball. And they really took that away from us. But, I mean, Andy, the number that you came up with, 71 points from turnover against us out of a score of 91 points, is is simply phenomenal. I mean, for me, that's the number one.
Yep.
That's the number one stat that really shows how that match played out. But you're right, George. All credit to the Swans. They were so much better than I expected them to be in terms of I just didn't think they'd have that energy or zip to bring to that contest. They're clearly super fit. They were really fantastic, I thought.
If you want to join us tonight, 0390163666. That's 0390163666, or you can Skype us Demonland31, we'll get straight into the questions from our listeners, which we've got from demonland.com. We put up a podcast thread, so if you do want to contribute, if you're not a member of Demonland, you do want to contribute, you can either call our number 0390163666. You can call that during the week, leave a message. We do later on have a voicemailer who left a message, so we'll play that shortly. You can contact us that way or sign up to demonland.com and join up, discuss your favourite football club, and you can jump on the podcast thread each week and ask a question or make a comment. And we'll start with Bigfoot, who says... this is talking about the turnovers. We forced more turnovers than Sydney, 81 to 75, yet they scored 70 points from turnovers from their 91 points in total, and we weren't able to capitalise when we turned the ball over. We folded under the pressure of Sydney's high pressure. How can we combat that in the future? If we get through the Lions and somehow get through the Cats, we are most likely going to have to play the Swans or Collingwood in a granny, and we've seen the results of our 4 matches against those 2 high-pressure teams. Demonland poster CYB added, what has happened to our turnover game? You cannot rely on clearance and stoppage goals all the time. This scoring source has all but dried up, and it's no surprise we rank in the bottom quartile in ball movement as well. Who wants to take that one? So we've got 2 sides of the coin. Turnovers, and how are we going to get through past these high pressure teams? What are we going to do to combat it? And also what's happened to our scoring, George?
It's partly tied up with what I was going to talk about and Binman's mentioned it coincidentally, about the 2 different styles of play, which are I've now watched seeing amongst the finals teams. To use the basketball analogy, I think teams like Melbourne, Richmond, although they lost, are playing a half-court press with a basketball, where you've got a real forward, and probably Geelong as well to a certain extent, Geelong. but they're and what that requires you to have is a really strong defensive unit. On basketball court, the back 3 are essential. In football, the back 7 are essential, and it's got to be a really strong structure to be able to employ it. So there are other teams out there, and I think Brisbane are a good example, who don't have that structure and can't employ it. So anyhow, the counter to that is you've got teams now like the Swans and Collingwood are playing man on man effectively, all up the ground, and sometimes you're forced into that situation because you haven't got a back defensive unit. But the other thing that's very useful when you're playing that type of style is you have a lot of young players who can run and continue to run.
Yeah.
And that's both the case for the Swans and for Collingwood. They've got a lot of old stages, of course, in both their sides, but they've also got a lot of young players, particularly through the midfields, who just run all day. I think is going to be very interesting over this final series, and we've seen it, Geelong versus Collingwood already, Melbourne versus the Swans, is which one's going to triumph. Yeah. It's a bit hard to know at this stage, but the games weren't all that far apart, but we're not quite sure what the outcome is going to be as we progress further into the finals. It's just as likely, the Geelong Collingwood game could have just as easily gone the other direction. Even ours, down to that last quarter, and apart from a few stupid things that we did during the game, it could have gone the other way as well. I don't think any club's in a position that they can change their mind at this stage. So it'll be interesting to see. I think the only tweaks that the coaches are capable of doing at this stage is individual players, but the styles will remain the same. And it's interesting, and that's why Longmire did a great job in our particular game. if Melbourne depends on that half-court press, you put the pressure up the field, and in our case, there was no pressure up the field from a lot of our people, and you cut out those defenders like the levers in the game, you really change the structure really change the structure in the way that Melbourne play and are able to attack. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting in the next couple of weeks to see which style comes out on top.
That's really interesting, George, because that was really my reflection watching this first week of final. I said a few weeks ago that the premiership winning model is the territory game, which is a half-court press is a really good analogy. That's really the way Melbourne like to play. Get in your forward half and keep it there, and multiple scores. That's often where we drive our turnover scores from, because we turn it over with teams desperately trying to clear it out of their defence, and we mop it up at the half-court line and bring it back in. We weren't able to trap it in our front half the way we were. I saw the board at three-quarter time it's great if you can watch it through binoculars, because as I've said before, they put up their key stats. They were down on their KPI for forward half. So they would have been pretty disappointed with that. And part of that was, a big part of that, I think, was Longmire's smarts. But so that territory model, Geelong play it, Brisbane play a version of it, but you're right, they struggled to stop the ball going back the other way. Geelong, definitely Melbourne and Richmond, obviously. That's been the premiership model, and I wonder whether the new model is this pressure, that it's like, in some respects, it's an old model, but both Collingwood and the Pies have excellent defensive systems. So it's not just that they're a one-on-one team like Brisbane, for instance, that needs to employ that model. They've also got a really good defensive system. And you make an excellent point about both teams' young players, because they're not just good footballers with good skills. They're really, really good athletes and good runners. And for me, watching Freo, the other thing about that second half of that game was marvelling at some of their runners. And it occurred to me that there's a shift in footy is that hyper level of pressure. Pressure's always been critical, but it's gone to another level. And how many good athletes there are. So when I say good athletes, that would not be out of place in elite 400-metre running, that sort of athlete. Incredible. A couple of things, though, I'd say is we could have won this game. So the 19 points was a bit, actually, it could have been a lot closer. We had our opportunities to put a gap on them. We're 15 points up. We get to 21 points up, kick the next goal in that third quarter after Cozzy kicked the first one in the third. And who knows, it might have looked different, but we lost momentum. It's something we've really not been able to do. And what I'm really curious about, so I'll get back to that question in a sec, is tactically we seem to be shifting. All of a sudden we're not predictable. I don't know, people are talking about our predictability. 3-4 goals given up by going aggressive corridor kicks. 3 of them from, 2 from May, who's got form in this space. He's done it a few times this season. And 1 from Gawn kicking into Hunt that coughed up a goal. Now, that was all because we were, especially in the third quarter, we came out and played high-risk footy, and we did right from the beginning. So it sort of panned out how I thought in terms of how we would play. But the problem with risk-reward footy with the dial towards risk is you give up goals, and that's what happened. We couldn't keep the pace out of the game, and we couldn't control the tempo. They did it brilliantly. But as for whether which model will prevail, we're going to stick with our model, although, as I said, there's been some pretty significant changes to it, and maybe that's a function of thinking through that by Goody, that maybe we've struggled with that new way of playing. But we'll stick with that model. And as you say, it'll be interesting to see. But this week we'll be playing a team that will also stick to their model. So
D Minion says, I couldn't make the trek down from Brisbane last Friday. Knowing we had the double chance, I wanted to get to Melbourne for either semi or the prelim and hopefully the granny. In round 23, I was able to watch us live at the Gabba, and we played with a totally different strategy going forward. We seemed to revert to a kick it to the pocket strategy or just bomb it in this week. Can any of you explain to me why that was, as it was difficult to ascertain from watching on the telly?
I think that was really just a function of... I said to my mate at the footy that one of the things about the Swans, and in particular the way Longmire coaches, is he's a disruptor. They disrupt. So it's like they come out to disrupt the opposition's plan as a key plank of the way they play footy. And for me, that felt like that. They wanted it down the line. They forced that issue. I thought that, and we couldn't get the wave run going. We couldn't get that transition that CYB was noting. That's what creates that open forward line. That's what creates the looks inside when you get that wave running. We talked about that after the Brisbane game. You take that away from you, then we can't get those looks inside to free players, and then you are left with kicking to the pocket and to the and when Gawn isn't impacting, when Jackson's not impacting, and Brown's not taking any marks, he took a mark all night. I don't think you're going to really struggle. And then the forwards weren't putting on the pressure or at the drop. So for me, that was more a function of great coaching and execution by the Swans than us not being changing tactics.
Buck Naked asks, would be interested in your thoughts on the 350-metre penalties, the buddy flop and general discipline. And Lazy adds that, are the incidents in this game overplayed or were we just beaten by an all-round better team on the night, George?
Yeah, I had the privilege of actually watching this in action from behind. The first buddy, the free that was relayed 50 from up the ground, Stephen May gave Buddy an absolute ripper of a kidney punch.
Yeah, that was stupid by me.
It was stupid.
We had the ball, we were going forward, and that was stupid.
Yeah, and then, of course, as they're both running back, Buddy, being the big man that he is, trying to impose himself, ran in straight into May. Of course, May just blocked him and Buddy flopped onto the ground. So the umpire, unfortunately, was sucked in by that, and that was a further 50-metre penalty.
That was appalling, and it wasn't, George, it wasn't the umpire near the bloody contest. It was the umpire down near the centre-half back line. He was 50 metres, 60 metres away and was blocked. I mean, Buddy was running directly away from him. That was just such an appalling call. What was May supposed to do? And you could see him afterwards saying to the umpire, "What, did you want me to move?" Or, that was infuriating.
It was disgraceful, that one. But, at the end
that's what turned the momentum of the game to a large degree, I reckon.
Yep. And Goodwin was scathing about it as well. At the end of the day, those 350, the one Harms, not greatly worried about because, yes, he could have avoided the amount of damage, I suppose, that he did. The person wasn't damaged because Harms wouldn't be playing this week.
Yeah, it looked much worse. And I was directly behind it. It looked terrible.
He knocked him over. He got up straight away virtually. Yeah. But that's what the rules are. That's 50 metres. And Goodwin was scathing about that because that put him within range of the goal. That, instead of being out on the 50-metre mark, he's sitting in the goal square. So those sort of little things in a game that's decided by 3 goals.
Well, there were three goals from 50-metre penalties in this game. For the entire season, we've only had 3 goals from 50-metre penalties.
That sums it up beautifully, doesn't it?
But the other part of the question was we were beaten by a better team on the night. There's no, there's no issue there. I mean, but it goes, those 350 metres is, again, it's a bit like the question that I asked both of you after the Pies game. So now, the same question. I presume you both think that the Swans are a legitimate flag contender?
Yeah, I do.
Absolutely.
Right. So we easily could have won that game. So the same logic applies as it does against the Pies. If they're legitimate flag contenders, and we've shown in both of those matches that we can match them and beat them on a given day, although we're struggling to prove that with both teams, then we're a flag contender as well.
Yeah, but when I have a look at our record against the remaining 6 teams, we're like three wins and 2 of them are against Brisbane. So, and 1 was against Freo on a wet deck. Like we're 3 from 10th, 3 or whatever it is.
But the thing is, in all of those games, Andy, we were leading.
I know, but we lost. We lost those games. I don't have. I'd love to have won 7 of them. Lose. Yeah, I know, but I would prefer to win. We do have.
Andy, just really quickly, there was a question last week, and I forget who it was from, and I was reflecting actually afterwards, but also after the game that I gave it pretty short thrift about, I forget the actual specific question about why some teams play bet well against other teams. And there's definitely, like, our model works super well against Brisbane's because of their reliance on their forward line, and our defensive system works well against theirs. And I was reflecting after this Swans game, and their record against us is phenomenal. And it's hard not to think that pressure that George was talking about, and that I was talking about in terms of the outside contest pressure, really does disrupt our game plan, because the trend is the friend, isn't it? So I think so. There are teams, like you're saying, George, there's these two different ways of the teams left in the finals that play footy. And in some respects, the style of Collingwood versus the style of Geelong, they're opposites, not quite opposites, but they've, and I think that on a given day that one disrupts the other. Whereas when we play Geelong, I'm more confident now of beating Geelong if we happen to win this week in the prelim than I would be of beating Sydney in a grand final if that's what ends up happening. A bit of water to go under a few bridges there, but do you know what I mean? In terms of the way our game plan stacks up super well against Brisbane and Geelong, less against the sort of high pressure and high running of the Swans and Pies.
We've got a caller on the line. Good evening. Welcome to the Demon Land podcast. Who am I talking to?
Good evening, Andy. Long-time listener, third-time caller. It's Kieran from Canberra. How are you all?
Hey, good, Kieran. How you going?
Very well. Are you okay, Andy?
I'm hanging in there.
Hanging in there, mate?
I'm hanging in by...
I was more calling just to see how you were, mate.
The double chance has definitely made my mood a little better. The fact that the equation remains the same. Look, we've just got to get the job done. Look, I'm not overly confident, but I'm hanging in there.
Well, I heard that you were talking about bogey teams, and I feel like it's never a given, but I feel we should be very, very confident about this week. And I'm calling in to ask two questions. The first is around something that I'm sure you'll be hesitant to talk about because you guys don't work in hypotheticals, but I'm interested from Binman, as being a betting man perspective, on where you guys think Brodie Grundy is at the moment in terms of coming to Melbourne, and if so, would it be possible for Mark Choco Williams to take Max Gawn into his home over the summer and teach him how to kick?
Well, in terms of, I'll let B-Man answer that in a second. But you'd think with Grundy, it's all depending on what happens with Luke Jackson. I guess so.
I reckon Luke Jackson will stay, and so I don't reckon we'll be needing Brodie's services. Thank you very much, Brodie. I don't really have a view on Brodie Grundy. To be honest, the issue for Brodie Grundy coming to Melbourne is he's no chop as a forward. So, like the idea of Jackson is not going to be a direct like for Jackson, because not that Jackson's been knocking down the doors as a forward either.
But we need,
he's got a lot of scope for improvement.
The fact is, if Jackson goes, we need a ruckman who can come in straight away, isn't a development, can just play as a ruckman and give Max
maybe
a
forward who can ruck would be more. I'd rather a decent forward who can ruck like Lob, for instance.
I agree, Ben, man. Yep.
Yeah.
This was the discussion I was hoping
Kieran, but Jackson's going to stay until proven otherwise.
Go ahead, Kieran.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly, and I know I'm jumping the gun. This should be done at the end of the season. This is kind of the discussion that I love you guys able to go into. Again, it should be done later when we're dealing in less hypotheticals, but I appreciate you taking my call. And lastly, I think we shouldn't be worried about our forward line. If there has been concern, don't forget T-Mac is yet to come back next year, and we've got a young bloke in that second team who's had a whole season under his belt, and I think we'll change our forward line dramatically and put some pressure on some of those forwards that may feel like they've got a ticket there regardless. So, yeah, not all doom and gloom. If I was there, Andy, I'd give you a big hug, mate. Don't stress. We'll be fine.
You're already talking about next year, and we're still a chance this year. So who's the one that's being negative now? There'll be
That's true.
plenty of time to talk about the post-mortem of the season, but let's wait until the corpse is cold before we start doing that. We've still got some life in us just yet.
Absolutely.
And we will talk about actually our forward line for this season shortly. So, go ahead, Kieran.
No, thank you very much, guys. Keep it up, and I look forward to chatting to you next week when we're about to take on Geelong.
I know. Well,
Good
call
on you,
in.
Kieran.
Feel free to call in.
Thanks, mate.
See you, gents. Bye.
Thanks, Kieran.
On the forward line, Andy, as Goody said, forward line's not really the problem when you're giving up 91 points. I mean, it's again, we've given up close to 100 points in a game of footy, and that's the problem.
All right, where were we? At the break of Gawn writes, it'd be great if you guys can discuss the strategy of playing Gawn as a forward for the majority of the game. Gawn has barely fired a shot as a forward. He provides little to no leads and almost tempts our midfielders to bomb it in long as opposed to lowering their eyes. Why has Goodwin been pursuing it for so long, and is it finally time to scrap the idea? Now, George, I know you have some thoughts in it, but maybe Bimman as well. Is this maybe a factor of him carrying an injury and we sort of forced to play him in the forward line? Because he's not doing any of that. Remember, how many times would we see him marking it at the last line of defence? When was the last time you saw him even really in our back line or deep in our back line?
I think I've said before, and I keep saying it again, it's not working. Maybe it is that he's carrying an injury and they're trying to protect him. But the reality is that he's a big. At the end of the day, he's a big lumbering guy and he's fantastic. But you can't expect him to play at both ends of the ground and around the ground for the whole game. No. The other difficulty it presents in the forward line is that when you look at the players who are in the forward line, Fritter doesn't chase all that very much. Gawn's in there, not unable to run. Ben Brown's not the fastest person in the world. Melcham is hot and cold. Some weeks he doesn't do anything whatsoever.
Some weeks we're praising him, and the other weeks we're ready to lynch him.
But when you've got a forward line of 6 players and 4 of them won't run or can't run, it's not surprising that you're getting the results that we're seeing. We really need someone else in there to help out, someone who's at least athletic, ready to run. If you're going to run the Joel Smith trial, well, run it because he can run, he can provide some protection. When we talk about defensive forwards, we can't have 6 defensive forwards. We need forwards to kick goals.
You had Smith sitting on the bench. He could have come on, but he would have taken Max off and put him down there.
Exactly. And we're totally dependent on Cozzy doing all the defensive work at the moment, and that was certainly the case in this game. And once again, you can't expect one player to do all the work. You can't expect Max to go in the ruck and then be down the back line and play full forward as well. It's just too demanding. I think the opportunity was lost 6 weeks ago to bring in Van Rooyen or someone else. The Wiedemann experiment failed. We'll find out this weekend whether T-Mac comes in. Really, this is the last roll of the dice. So this is the time to do it if you're going to do it. We talked about it, is an 80% Petrarca better than nothing at all? Well, probably is. Is an 80% T-Mac better than what we've been getting so far over the last 6 weeks? I'm of the opinion it probably is. Or put a Joel Smith in, and he's not ready either. Let's make no bones about it. He's only played 2 games at Casey.
2, but he'll be fit. He'll be fit enough. If they named him as the sub, he'll be ready to roll. But I reckon Maxi must be. You make an excellent point actually, Andy, about now that I think about it, we really, and maybe that's a factor in our inability to stop. He's not getting any intercept marks, is he? And you take, I know there's a question about it, so I won't jump to it now, but Gawn is not dropping back and taking those defensive marks. They're stretching May, and so as well as May played, he was one-on-one with buddy for the whole match, so he wasn't intercept marking. Apart from the fact that he took a whole bunch directly on. Do you know what I mean? Directly on Franklin, as opposed to zoning off and getting to contest. Yeah. Well, zoning off is what I meant. Like he had plenty of contested marks where he beat. He had a fantastic game, but we had no sort of with Lever being well held, we had no players zoning off each other. But without Gawn there, and also I reckon having we've lost a bit with Brayshaw not being either at halfback flank and taking, he was leading our marks, our intercept marks, and I'm not sure where that number is at now. So you take out the intercept marks he was taking down back deep and Gawn, that's a high number of contest marks that we're not taking that we were. That's definitely been a factor. As I said, my suspicion is that he's struggling a bit and has been since the middle of the year, I reckon, Maxi. And the fact that they're playing him forward is cover the fact that we don't have T-Mac, and what a huge out T-Mac has proven to be, as we were all worried about that it might be.
Kelpian wants to know, he wants to talk about key stats. We won the disposal count, inside 50s, free kicks, hit-outs, contested possession, marks inside 50, contested marks. We got belted in pressure department, pressure acts, tackles, and hence turnovers and scores from turnovers. Is the latter the reason we couldn't capitalise on the former? I guess meaning, we didn't capitalise on winning the contested possessions, hit-outs, disposals and marks inside 50. So I guess comes back to that pressure. Yep, I guess we've sort of answered that. The pressure did sort of was costly, and in the end, being able to win possession, when you win possession and you're getting tackled straight away, that makes it hard.
To that, I'd add though that one of the problems with track being so obviously hampered was you essentially lose a 20th of your running power.
And you don't get that explosion out of packs. And
you don't get the explosion out of packs. We're less likely to win around the contests. As well as Oliver played, he got hit in the head pretty hard. And he was struggling as well. But just forgetting what you miss from, he would win more and get to more contests, Petrarca, without that injury. You miss the kilometres that he runs because, I don't know what he runs, but maybe he averages 10. He wouldn't have run more than 6 or 7 kilometres in that game of footy, which again makes it more baffling they didn't bring Smith on, because the reason I raise that is because that running is where we get our turnovers from. We get our turnovers from getting multiple players to the contest when we get the ball moving quickly. They get their turnovers. Well, we coughed up at least 4 from goals directly from bad kicks. That wasn't pressure. It was simply bad technique and bad kicks. There's 24 of their 71 points. But they got a lot of their turnovers closer to the contest, whereas we like to get them out in the open. And so, obviously if you can get them, you're going to score from turnover, which is a really key stat for us.
Watson 11 writes, it's been bugging me since about round 7 that we suddenly became a lot easier to score against. We have had all sorts of semi-logical reasons thrown up, such as loading, lack of forward pressure, injuries, etc. All have some merit, but last Friday, none of those were a factor. May was unbelievable with 16 intercepts, and yet we still conceded scores from 42% of Sydney's inside 50s versus our average of 31% in finals last year. Any ideas why? Are we missing Brayshaw as that defensive winger getting back into defensive 50? Max has had 33% fewer spoils this year than last year. Do we need him back doing 80% ruck work in the defensive role to help out in defensive 50 and rest him on the bench instead of up forward? Do we need Bowie in for defensive ground balls that cost us against Sydney? Looking forward to the podcast. Who wants to take that? We sort of touched on a couple of those, George.
I'll start off. All of the above is the answer, I think, with this. There's never any one reason why something's happening. It's there's a whole series of things going into it. I think we've dropped off in this game. The absence, effectively, of Petrarca really, really hurt us around the ball.
We couldn't win those key ones that we'd win. That's our
exactly,
model. We're one down at every stoppage. That people need to remember that, and part of that is because track wins more than his fair share of those balls.
And I there was another it wasn't reflected in any stats that I said because you can't put it in. I think Sydney scored 4 goals from ball ups inside their 20-metre arc, where the people around the ball failed to cover off people like Heaney.
There was one that was a shocker, wasn't there?
Failed to cover off Parker. And again, you go, what's missing there? Why are they so free? And then you go, well, yeah, because Petrarca's on one leg. They just can't make that extra yard to get to them, to the opposition. They were virtually unattended at all. Those
the one
players.
Parker kicked was a shocker, wasn't it?
Yeah, Rowbottom I think got another one.
Yeah,
that's it at the end of the game. But all of those things that were mentioned by our poster are all factors. It's just little things here, little things there. At the end of the day, it all adds up to a 3.5 goal difference between the two sides. But as Goody said many times, this game is very ruthless. You get what you get. We lose the game because of all these little things. You've just got to do that much better.
I agree with all of that. I reckon a really big factor, though, and perhaps even bigger than those factors combined, is our shift in our game style. If you look back from that Dogs game on, is that we have played fast footy. We played fast footy for the whole Dogs game. We certainly played fast footy for the first half of the Brisbane game. We looked to play fast footy against the Pies, obviously, in that first half, where we really we're playing much higher risk, higher reward footy, and we're getting hurt on turnover. I mean, the Pies killed us on turnover. On rebound is probably a better way of thinking of it. So using that basketball analogy, if the easiest way in basketball, George, if you're behind 20 points in a game of basketball, you want a fast game of basketball. It's the same in footy. The faster it is, the higher the scoring is going to be. And as I said, I don't know what May was thinking, but in the third quarter, I would have expected it was a directive from the coach to be more aggressive. But kicking those balls into a corridor, I think it was Petty who tried to kick it to, where it would have required the perfect kick to weight it in the middle of 3 Swans players, and it didn't even get his hand on it. Like, it got intercepted and we gave up a goal. Similarly, when Maxi Gawn, down the line is the kick we've been doing the 3 years under Goody, and all of a sudden he tries to pick off a 20 metre kick into a nest of players to hunt, and it gets turned over. I mean, that's unusual for Melbourne, and it's a funny shift at this stage of the season. And I really think that that's the driver of why we're giving up such high scores, because we're doing what other teams do, is that we're taking lots of risks, and when they don't work, you get scored on.
John Demonic wants to know, was the round 23 domination of the Lions, in hindsight, not ideal preparation for the ferocious pressure of that the Swans brought defensively? And Big Man, this is me talking now. That you've talked in the past about Richmond in 2018 having a few soft kill leads into the finals, costing them big when finals footy hit. And you also theorised that perhaps Geelong might suffer the same fate given their relatively easy lead into this final series. That clearly wasn't the case in their match, or perhaps was it? And in regards to John's question about our lead-in match to the finals, and there was only that one match that was really a soft kill, do you think that domination hindered us at all when it came to the Swans' pressure? And then having the week off, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't think it was a soft kill. I thought we were phenomenal in that Brisbane game. I said it on the podcast, and I pushed back against the narrative that they were poor, and I said it in the lead up to the Richmond game. Let's not forget they came out and beat Richmond and played pretty good football to do so. And so, if anyone who's disregarding our performance on Brisbane based on their performance, I think is giving us not the credit that we're due. So their pressure was fantastic. Their contested ball numbers, as I said, after that game were, after the 10 minutes, that was basically the same for the rest of the match. So I wonder whether the week off, our momentum, I wonder if that's more of a factor. But, I mean, it's a good question in terms of, certainly they weren't providing the pressure that Brisbane didn't bring the pressure that Swans did. That was pretty phenomenal, wasn't it? That intensity, and their tackle numbers were, as George was saying, were off the charts as Collingwood's were as well.
Detective Sergeant Taggart says, I'm curious to know if the guys think and this is talking about the pre-finals bye worked against us and to a lesser extent Geelong. It seems both Collingwood and Sydney were able to apply enormous pressure during their respective matches, despite the fact that Binman and others were anticipating those relatively younger teams would begin to run out of steam come finals time. You did say that, Binman. I can't help but wonder if the pre-finals bye helped Sydney and Collingwood freshen up more than it helped us freshen up. It'll be interesting to see how the Pies fare against Fremantle having to back up again next week, while Sydney will obviously get to freshen up again ahead of their prelim.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Well, for one thing is we didn't freshen up. We had a full practice match. So we elected to do that. Now, last year coming into the grand final, we look like, it certainly worked last year. Maybe it didn't work this year, we're following that pattern. So definitely, though, I expected both Collingwood and the Swans to wilt. That's absolutely true. And I was super impressed, not so much with the Pies. I mean, I don't think the Pies were as impressive as the Swans. Their pressure was good, but not Swans level. That was one of the most incredible pressure games I've been to watch live, I reckon. But yeah, it could well have helped them absolutely freshen up those young guys coming into that first final, that week off. I mean, that's the purpose of it, isn't it?
It was interesting.
Exactly.
Ed Langdon on the news tonight came out and said somebody asked that question whether the bye was worthwhile or not, and he said something along the lines of, "Well, we play 22 games during the season, one week after another. It's sometimes better that you just play next week. You're used to doing that sort of thing." I think Geelong benefited because they really do have so many old players. And the extra week off kept them on the ground, quite frankly, in a few cases. And I think the Pies actually dropped off a little bit. Particularly, they looked very impressive early on, but Geelong were able to come back. Whether that's going to be the case this week for both of those sides, not for Geelong, but for Collingwood, I'm just wondering whether all that hard running is starting to have its effects. And as Goodwin has said, finals are a different match. It's a different season. You've got to play a different way in finals, and it will be a very interesting. It was an interesting question from our listener. So we'll find out.
Pies, whether it was mentally switched off or physically tiring, that last play they gave up that goal was really pretty poor in terms of their defensive running and spread. Side bottom basically let Rowan push forward and gave up on the chase. And that was, maybe that's mental, I'm not sure, but they were looking pretty exhausted near the end.
Yeah.
We got Executioner has a comment on last year's final series. He says, last year we played Brisbane, Geelong and Western Bulldogs, all teams who couldn't apply much pressure and didn't play man-on-man footy. This year our hardest games have been against teams playing high-pressure man-on-man like Sydney, Collingwood and Carlton. My question is, can the Demons find a way to play against that man-on-man style and kick away again? It seems to me like our model stands up against certain teams but not others, and sort of, again, touched on that as well. So unless you have anything to
I don't expect this. I mean, we're not going to be changing our spots. We're a leopard who's not changing our spots
at
this
the thing.
stage of the year. Having said that, as I said, I think it's gone unnoticed or uncommented on, at least, that we've made some pretty significant tactical changes to the way we go, not least being more aggressive with our ball movement and being more trying to drive the score. When's the last time we really looked to control the tempo? It was the second half probably of the Brisbane game for a little bit, and then certainly in the third quarter for the first 15 minutes of the Pies game. But other than that, we're not playing that Melbourne model of, when we're in trouble, slow their momentum, and we've got the momentum, get it, and then kick the gears back and control the tempo. So quite a big shift. Maybe that's other teams disrupting our ability to do that, and maybe I'm underestimating how much other teams are disrupting us. but it's definitely a shift. But we're not going to suddenly radically change our model. Come, particularly Goody. I mean, everyone makes the comment about Goody, which is true. He's a stubborn bugger. There's no doubt about it. And the other thing in this mix that's interesting, and who knows around the debate, but there's lots of reasonable debate around. Well, why aren't they bringing some fresher players in? If some of these players are banged up, why aren't they bringing in a Chandler who's fresh and ready to roll, or a Laurie, or, as we've talked about, a JVR, or,
Yeah, we've got some questions about that later on.
He's got a particular philosophy, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, keeping track on the ground was like the philosophy writ large of resilience. No, he'll run through it. And he'll probably get selected this week as well.
Yeah, I don't expect to see any real change in the strategy, but the way you beat man on man is to get the ball into your better ball users' hands. And, that was limited in this game because of Petrarca's injury and a few other injuries as well. Obviously, if Gawn's not getting the ball as much as you need, but that's certainly the way to beat it. I'm also thinking that you really need to get some younger legs in there, even though it's a do or die match now. That you need to get them in because we need something else. You need that bit of extra run.
We need a bit of energy in that.
That's.
But you're right. That's exactly the way to beat that 1-on-1, and we almost did. There were a number of times, so frustrating, where we just missed the handball. If he gets out, we're out. Like there were at least 4 times where that's the great thing about watching at the ground. You just don't see on the telly. That there was at least 4 times that I thought, well, we get out here, we're going to get forward to the ball, we'll score, and we stuffed up that handball, or it wasn't really necessarily the pressure they were bringing, although that was obviously a factor, but there was some just really bad skill errors, which meant that ordinarily we would have got it outside that contest and got it ahead of the ball. The other thing is, as much as Salem, they did put time into Salem, and I thought that was really clever, but he's not been the same player, has he?
Definitely not.
No.
He's not giving us anywhere. Like, he's that sort of player who is so good at hitting targets, and he's just not giving us that bite off half back flank. And arguably Bowie gave us more energy and bite the previous against Brisbane, didn't he?
Yep. New Demonland poster, Everything's a Blur, says, first time poster, long time listener, love the pod. Question, I'd love your thoughts on this that's driving me crazy. What is it about the MCG this year? Cannot be a coincidence that we win almost every away game and feels like we've lost almost every home game at the G. The Carlton win was hardly convincing. Is it the Melbourne weather, given nearly all the MCG games have been cold and drizzly, which leads to the frustrating fumbling that we keep seeing? Do we need the warmer conditions to execute cleaner? Keep up the good work and go Demons. Firstly, welcome to Demonland, and second, thanks for your kind words about the podcast. If you too want to ask a question and you're a loyal listener but not a member of Demonland, jump on demonland.com, sign up and look for our podcast threads and you can ask a question. As to Everything's a Blur's question, I wholeheartedly agree, and we should be petitioning the AFL to play all of our home games during finals at Optus Stadium. Guys, any thoughts on the any thoughts on the MCG?
Honestly, Andy, I have got no idea why this is the case. The only thing I can suggest for this season is that we seem to be playing a lot more of the top 8 sides at the MCG.
Yeah, that's
closer games, all that sort of thing. In previous years, when we're further down the bottom, you'd be playing Fremantle and in those days, not all the also rans as home games, courtesy the AFL fixturing. But this year it's been particularly noticeable. I don't think the problem is the MCG, it's perhaps the opposition.
So should we be petitioning the AFL to get Essendon to play us in the grand final? And then
I wonder whether, two thoughts. When I read the question before the show, I had 2 thoughts. One is that we build ourselves up for travelling. And if you hear them talk about it, they love travelling. And we've got an incredible record with 112. Is that
I think the last 12 or 13, on the road.
12 or 13. So maybe the flip to that sort of attitude is that you go away with this real focus and psychologically that's helpful. maybe the flip to it is that they psychologically ease off at home or something, and they don't get some of the benefits that they get of travelling together and the things that they've talked about. That was one thought I had. The second one was that almost every game at the G this year has been wet or slippery. There's been, and particularly this second half, if Collingwood was, Pies was, the Collingwood, the Blues certainly was. It was cold and heavy that night. It was slippery in this game on the weekend. Now, I would have thought
it's not just us though. They're copying it too.
Well, no, I'm thinking, of course. But I'm thinking that, for instance, the Pies and the Swans, we've just talked about their game is built around this pressure and the pressuring that the post-clearance possession. And I was just talking then about how many times did we miss that last handball of the chain that would have got us out into space and running forward of the ball. Maybe the wet weather suits those high-pressure teams that George was talking about more than it does us. I wouldn't have thought that previously, but just trying to find a reason for our struggles there. But maybe it's as simple as what George said: we're playing better teams.
Maybe we need to get the hose out at Gosh's paddock and wet the field before we train. Oh My D's wants to know, has Brayshaw's recent move into the middle as an inside mid come at the cost of the grunt he gives us along the non-Langdon wing or down bag? Thanks for everything you do with the podcast. And we actually have a response on the thread from Demon Dynasty regarding that question, and I'll read it out here, and then you guys can give your thoughts. This is Demon Dynasty. In my humble opinion, we don't need him to play halfback role at all now that the back six are set and we have Salem. Bowie on the sidelines as Salem's replacement. We won the premiership with him playing a roughly 80 to 20 wing forward role last season, and what a season it was for Gus. He spent virtually no time in our defensive 50 last season. The midfield experiment worked for one game and has been a progressive failure ever since, culminating in his worst performance this season, possibly his last two seasons, on Saturday night. Time to push him back to the wing/half forward role of last year and move Harms back in as his replacement, playing the mid/half forward role that he mostly played last season with pretty good effect also. Gus doesn't have the upper body strength and leg power, that is drive out of congestion away from the opponent/tagger, to play more than a brief cameo on the odd occasion through the middle, in my view. Would much rather see Harms back in with brief cameos from Cozzy and or Bedford, if he happened to be picked to add some speed and provide the opposition with a different look/matchup conundrum on game day. Why would you want to take away one of your biggest strengths from 2021 and make things that much easier for the opposition unless absolutely necessary, or the midfield experiment was a great success? It makes no sense to me at all. What are your thoughts, guys, on moving Brayshaw back to a wing as it was successful last year?
I'd move Brayshaw back to the wing simply because Jimmy Jordan's not there at the moment.
Who played on the wing this week?
It's sort of a funny Spargo hybrid.
Spargo hybrid, yeah.
But it's not really a wing role. It's more of a it's. I agree with everything actually Demon Dynasty just said, that except for the fact he did push back into defence a lot and playing in the wing last year, and we missed exactly that.
Well, he saved a goal in the grand final.
No, that was a big function of. I mean, that's a big function of the wingers game, and that's probably what we've missed with Spargo, because he's not pushing it as deep into the defence. So I agree with all of that, and in particular, progressively becoming less and less beneficial
our back
in the
six
midfield
is back, and our back six
more in that role in the midfield. And I wouldn't be surprised if Longmire put some time into him as well, because even though his numbers have dropped off in the middle a little bit, he's defensively still playing a role there, but he didn't have any impact on the game defensively in this game, and sort of had a bit of a strange nothing game, didn't he? He wasn't sort of, it's neither here nor there, but I would put him back on the wing in a heartbeat. It's an example of some of the changes I guess they've made, and Goody's not likely to do it though, is he?
Nope. Demon Eye states, Goodwin has always said that they trust their systems. The question for the panel is, do you still trust their systems? And I know B-Man probably does, but we have a call, not a caller, we've got a voicemailer. Matt did leave a message. It sort of relates to this, so I'll play that, and then you guys can tell me whether you still trust in the systems, which aren't likely to change anyway.
Guys, Matt from Caulfield North here. Love the show. Just wanted to call up and see, I've seen a lot of talk about people sort of discrediting the Goodwin model of coaching and say, Longmire could change coaching on the day, on the fly, and change up tactics, and we couldn't. And they're questioning that coaching model, but it's the model that won us a premiership. It's the model that got us to second on the ladder, and it's the model that helped us thrash Brisbane and some other teams this year. To me, I think the reason we lost on Sydney to Sydney the other day was because it just felt like they were phased. I think it was the game plan still holds up, but the players all looked a bit stunned, and it came through with the lack of discipline that we saw, the mistakes. I mean, when they went in for goals and they missed at point blank range and were falling over themselves and stuff. I think it just seemed like they just weren't settled the whole game. So I wondered if you guys could talk on sort of that mental, sort of shock that I was feeling for them. And I think you guys talked about mental state, not playing into it too much last week, but I don't know. I think there's something in that. Anyway, looking forward to the show. See ya.
If anyone does want to call in and leave a message, you can call during the week on 03 9016 3666, 03 9016 3666. You can always leave a message. No one answers that phone, and we'll play it like we played Matt's just now. B-Man?
On system, I think Matt makes an excellent point. I've talked about this heaps of times on the podcast. For me, the biggest factor in football was injury, and we just never talk about it enough. I'm not blaming injury for this loss, but we had a perfect season last year. Everything lined up. We just have not had that this year. We've, this season will finish, whatever ends up happening, and the stories will come out about how banged up our players have been. The system is, Matt's exactly right. The system won us a flag. The system has meant that we've lost a final, yet we're still in it. We're playing a game which we're $1.30 favourites coming into this game, which is shorter than we were when we flogged them by 60 points. So we're a very good chance of making a prelim against one of our nemesis teams in Geelong. I think the thing about system and that coaching philosophy is that it's a bit hard. It depends where you sit on that as an opinion on what your belief about coaching is, but that's what Goody's philosophy is. So, from my perspective, I support the club and I support Goody. It's a bit, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If, you get the flag because that's the system that built, he's going to stick with this system or a system, his approach. That's his modus operandi as a coach. Unlike Scott, who's a bit more fluid and Longmire, there are different types of coach, as I've said. So I think for me at least, what's the point sort of getting annoyed with Goody's philosophy? That's his philosophy, and so we've appointed him a senior coach, and we've just re-signed him. So people should probably accept that he's going to stick to a particular way of doing things. Just on the mental stuff, I hadn't thought that would be an issue for us. But, for whatever reason, we were definitely ill-disciplined. We definitely showed some signs of, mental errors that weren't, maybe referred pressure but there's no doubt about that. We struggled to deal with, and maybe we did struggle to deal with playing at home and, in front of our crowd and all of that stuff. There was a bit, I don't know about you guys, there was a bit of a weird atmosphere at the G on Friday. It wasn't celebratory like it was that when I was last there for a big final at the G in 2018. There was a bit of a hesitancy and nervousness in the air, it felt like to me. And visually, it looked like that's how the players played. So, maybe they didn't cut. Maybe there was some mental chinks in their mental armour.
I'm not a great fan of the idea of mental weakness, but what is a factor, I think, is confidence and momentum. When you're running well, things seem to fall your way. When things aren't going well, things turn to disaster. I mean, we had a couple of cases in this game. The debacle with who was it, Melcham and Spargo in front of goal.
There were 3 or 4 of them, wasn't there?
Nibbler can't kick 20 metres to hit someone on the lead. Just takes away all the confidence, all the hard work to get the ball up to that end of the ground to see it thrown away.
Yeah,
that blows your confidence.
And the crowd's confidence.
And the crowd's
energy out, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a reason why the crowd's not yelling. It's because those sort of events happen. That's exactly it. They're groaning. So it's not a mental factor. It's just that's the nature of all sport as well. When you're up, you're up. You do miraculous things like we did in last year's grand final. When you're down, things just never seem to go your way. The ball bounces the wrong way. All those sort of things. So, but I think that caller gave his own answer. The system is what got us there in the first place. The system gives you better results. You're more likely to get a win using the system that the players have had drilled into them than just going out there and kicking the ball around without any real system to it. So we'll see more of the same. It's just whether the execution, as Goody said in his interview, it's all about the execution and the fundamentals. You need to get the basics right. When we do those, we look fantastic. The confidence goes up. The crowd will cheer.
If Goody was a little bit more of a comedian, that I'd love to see him come to the presser on Thursday and say, look, I've had a bit of a think about the way we play and I've decided that I really, really like the Swans game and we're going to implement it tomorrow.
Well, look, no one's suggesting they wholesale change the entire way that they play.
Right.
But we, we've come up against these pressure teams a few times and have beaten us. And I know that in the second Collingwood game, had things... had we kicked straighter, things could have worked out a little bit differently. But I think we just need something else.
Well, what's more likely is they'll tweak their system over the summer to address that issue.
Well, that's
They're
next
year.
year.
Not likely to suddenly come up with a new model, are they? I mean, they'll look to mitigate it.
Yeah.
Though. So maybe they'll tag some of those pressure players if we get to play the Swans in a grand final, for instance. Maybe they'll be more specific about their targeting. Maybe they didn't really run any tags. Maybe they'll tag Rowbottom, for instance, or do something unusual like that.
The first week of finals was pretty good watching from a neutral perspective. We saw some close, we saw the close seesawing, high-scoring battle in Brisbane, a heart-stopping close battle at the G between the Cats and the Magpies, a massive comeback out in the West as the Bulldogs managed to choke once again at Optus Stadium. Do you guys have any more thoughts? You've spoken about some of the games. Anything else you want to go over before we go into the ins and outs?
Not really. I think it was an interesting round from the different contrasts that were in those 3 games. In a way, I didn't enjoy the Richmond Brisbane game because it was just defence free from both sides.
It was appalling for both teams, wasn't it?
Just nothing on both sides. It was just who's going to kick the most goals because is the siren going to sound before it's our turn, sort of thing.
What did you think about the goal, the arc, Tom Lynch's goal point?
I thought it was awesome. Couldn't have.
How would you feel? All right, my thoughts on it.
Well,
we know what you'll feel like.
It was a
I want
it was a point.
on the back of that decision. So
the fact is
fine by me.
The shot was a point. All right, he knew it, whatever. But
he knew it. Yeah.
But it was called a goal, And there's no way that video could conclude the angle that they had. Someone had a cell phone camera, mobile phone camera angle that showed that it was, but there was no way that angle that they had could definitively say. And I don't care about his reaction. I don't care about his reaction.
Everyone says it's a point.
It doesn't matter.
It's a point.
I know, but the rule, and if we have to obey the rules of the AFL, it should have been a goal.
Well,
but I'm very happy that they didn't get
maybe
it.
they've got a secret camera angle that they don't show.
Well, why wouldn't they show it? Why wouldn't then the next day they go, here's the evidence? Everyone's
because it's all secret source stuff. I love that it's a billion-dollar industry and they're applying the club cricket rule on umpiring, which is if the batsman looks like he's hit it, then you give him out.
Did you know that was? Did you know that was something? The reaction of the? Did we know that? Did anyone know that?
I didn't know that, but it's fair enough too. He missed it.
So you have to cheer
I
now.
thought actually, to be perfectly honest, other than the fact that, as I said, it meant that I won money on that game, so I was thrilled from that perspective.
Oh, and Richmond lost. I'd much prefer playing
what
Brisbane.
The whole
than
controversy meant was that Lynch didn't get bloody criticised for missing an absolute
terrible.
soda.
How did he miss that?
Cost them the game.
Yeah.
He lost them the game of footy.
Yeah.
I mean, he kicks that 99 times out of 100. You'd think. So I would rather we bag Lynch than the AFL in this circumstance.
I think what we're going to see come out of this, as was suggested by a couple of our posters, why in the hell haven't you got a LiDAR or a laser at the top of the goal post?
Microchips in the ball or whatever, so it knows. Well, then it knows.
Camera.
It knows exactly whether it went through the goals or the points.
Why wouldn't you just put a camera on the top of the post, pointing straight up?
Straight up.
Yeah.
Yep,
like.
Yeah.
Put a man on the moon and you can't work out whether a footy goes over a post.
Yeah, unless you add another 20 foot to your post. But yeah, a simple camera or a laser on top of the post, it's not all that hard, Gil.
Yep. All right. Let's before we go on to give our opinions on any changes this week, we have a few questions about this from our listeners. This is the first one is about the fitness of Christian Petrarca. This is from Rab D. Nesbitt. He says, in a 2018 preliminary final, Richmond played a hampered Dusty in a tacit admission that their chances of success hinged on his presence. They still lost heavily. With a similar injury, Corky, to track, do we think we might be tempted to do likewise? And if so, would we be sending out the same signals? Can the presence of an 80% fit superstar lift all his teammates enough to make up that difference? If so, can you think of any famous examples where this has worked or backfired? And Gibroni wants to know if Petrarca is not fit to play this week, who should come in, a mid or a forward? And I think we'll play track no matter what, unless he's physically can't walk. Then, but if he did, unless he physically can't work, he's playing 100%. But if he had to pull out, I think they would probably replace him with Dunstan. They would more likely go like for like, positionally that is, than to replace him with a forward, even if Track's going to play mostly forward this week. So but what are your thoughts on Track? He's obviously they'll play him if he can't walk, but if he doesn't...
They'll definitely play him. And to give you the answer to the second part of the question, it was actually answered in one of the threads on Demonland today. Remember this bloke called Stephen May who played with a hamstring injury last year in the grand final?
I forgot about that one.
I forgot about that one. Dermot Burton played with 3 broken ribs in the grand final. Yeah, that seemed to work.
Well, May, they didn't even tell that he had that. Didn't tell him that he had the.
Yeah, so and it just depends on the extent of the injury. The Dusty one where he could barely move, not surprising. But if in other circumstances, you just look at it, you roll the dice. Is it going to last? It didn't work for Taylor Adams this week, as an example. But as one of our other posters said, Track's injury used to be known as shin splints. People have been playing with that. It's not a broken leg, despite what
fractured.
Fractured leg, according to the media.
It is a fractured leg. He's got an airline fracture,
but
still a fracture.
It's not a weight. It's not a weight bearing bone.
Exactly. The bigger problem is the calf, the kick to the calf.
They won't play him if he's. Look, this is an interesting question around what I was saying before about whether, like, if the question is what will they do as opposed to what would I like them to do, I'm not as convinced that they should be playing him if they, because of what we lose with his run. And our game is so depending on everyone's ability to run and cover distance. It depends if he's good to go, but he's got form already. He's played a game this season where he wasn't good to go, and he said he was. It would really piss me off completely if he comes in and he's limping and he's not giving us anything. That's and it's interesting. The question was, are there any examples of where it's worked or it hasn't worked? Well, there's some famous ones like Derby Brereton or whatever, but there was an example just this round of one where it didn't work because it was an error, I think, to play Dustin Martin. I said it before the game. And if you watch, not only didn't he give anything, he was a liability in terms of he wasn't providing any defensive run at all. He barely spent a minute in the midfield. He was basically a decoy forward. So they were one player down almost. He had almost zero influence on that game. There's a case to be made that they would have won that game if they didn't pick Dusty. So is it a risk worth taking? I mean, you don't know what obviously the club have got the information, so you can't really tell from outside. But if he runs onto the ground, opening bounce, and he looks hampered, well,
we'll answer that. We'll have all the answers next week. We'll circle back. Guga states, I am convinced defending this premiership has left us very fatigued. We start well and fade. This has been the case for both the season itself and within most games. Rather than reaching our peak, I think we are just hanging on. A prelim appearance will be a good result from here. Question for the podcast, do we die wondering with the same 22 or do we roll the dice on some fresher names who are perhaps not as weighed down by a long season? So I'll ask you guys, do we show some daring, guys? Bring in some fresh meat, perhaps Bowie, Bedford or Chandler, maybe Smith or JVR. Hold off on the T-Mac opinions as we have a question about him next. But any of the other players are fair game for us to discuss now. We've seen some of our opposition roll the dice on some youngsters in the finals. In fact, Brisbane just played a first gamer on Thursday night and he kicked a goal. So what do you think, guys? Do you think we'll likely to? I mean, there's a few players who were a bit down. Could we bring in a Bowie? Could we bring in a Bedford? Maybe if Spargo's out, just to add a bit of dash and some fresher legs.
The question fits into the same category. Is it what I would do if I was senior coach, or is it what will happen? What will happen?
Well, it's got to be what's going to happen. I know what I would do in some of the cases, but yeah.
Well, if they get up from their injuries, it's unlikely there'll be any major change. Although, I mean, it didn't seem in his post-match presser when he was asked about T-Mac that it didn't seem from his answer that he was really in the frame. But I won't be shocked if there's no changes.
I think Binman's absolutely right. It's a question of what will be the changes versus what should be the changes. And unfortunately, from this game, players like Hunt have put themselves in the barrel when you've got Bowie sitting there capable. Up forward, Melcham was back to bad Melcham this week. The old looking for the cheapies out the back and not doing any running at all. When you've got people like Bedford running around in Casey providing something. T-Mac, yes, maybe. JVR, yes, maybe because we really
maybe Smith.
Maybe Smith. I was really surprised with Smith simply because he's in no worse a position or no better a position than T-Mac.
Well, he's fitter. He's fitter than T-Mac.
But one game versus two, and Smith.
Yeah,
really,
but it's not really a game time. It's
no.
But
Smith didn't provide a great deal in the Casey game.
No, that's true.
But so yes, there should be some changes. Will there be? Probably not.
They did beat this team 3 weeks ago by nearly 10 goals. So
yeah.
Which, just speaking of which, Andy, just before, in case I forget, I meant to say, regardless, I mean, it's been a journey this season, hasn't it? So what a last few weeks it's been, last 5-6 weeks in terms of emotion. You know, the ups and downs, the Dogs game, the Pies loss, the Blues thriller, how the ups of the Brisbane game and how devastating this loss was. But despite the loss, it was a fantastic game of footy to watch, although it was frustrating. A bit like the Pies game as well. So it's certainly been a journey, a ride that we've got one more week at least.
Yes, it was a win for the ages, says, I think the time has come to roll the dice with T-Mac. If we don't do it this week, we can't wait until a preliminary final to try. It has to be this Friday night. Gives him the extra game against higher quality opposition and gives us the extra key forward we have been craving since T-Mac went down. This will allow Gorney to spend rucking and playing his more traditional role around the ground. It's a risk, but a calculated one. No point having him as a sub. He needs to play to free up Big Benny Brown. Jacko / Gorney went up forward. We won't be winning anything without another key forward in our lineup. If we lose doing it, then so be it. We can't beat the other contenders with our current setup. We need to roll the dice to alleviate pressure from Big Benny Brown and the resting ruck. This will bring the smaller forwards into the game and straighten us up significantly.
Thanks for putting my question up, Andy.
Sorry. Yes. You're saying that's coming from me. Yeah. All these questions are just my nom de plumes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow.
We said, yeah.
We'll need them, yeah.
Yeah.
Just while I think of it, that speaking of ruck work, I thought Hickey had a fantastic game, didn't he? He was just amazing. 80% ruck time.
Yeah.
And in the first quarter, when I was up and about, I yelled out that he was a bit hinky after he'd done some sort of funky error, and then he proceeded to give our rucks a bath. So I was like, it just didn't work out for me on Friday night.
Well, I forgot to add that Demon WA also added, will we pull the trigger or stick the same structure that smashed the Lions in the home and away? Was the answer to that. Doug Reamer's 2 cents on the T-Mac issue. I'm not saying they should bring in T-Mac, but we were horribly exposed for the lack of a second key forward. Even if Melksham had kicked straight, we constantly win the ball in the middle and snap it out to centre half forward to only have AMB or Sparrow contest it. And with Brayshaw not on the wing now, we lack a link up down the line. We need one of Smith or Weed or JVR in to straighten us up. In finals, you have to kick down the line and take territory when the pressure is on. You need big forwards to compete and at least half the contest. That, in my opinion, is not having Spargo, A&B or Sparrow, who played well, trying to wrestle 2 opponents. If we go in and ask Petraka to play 80% forward time, we are kidding ourselves.
Yep.
All of the above.
Yeah.
I'm amazed they didn't bring a talk. Like, I don't know who they were, I mean, Weed obviously
saying it for weeks.
Huge disappointment, but yeah.
We're running out of time to make a change like that to our structure.
And the danger against Brisbane is they will aim to kick a big score. So
yes,
we have to improve on what we've been our output certainly in the last couple of weeks to be able to be competitive with it. So we need someone to kick goals, and we can't depend on, as we saw on the weekend, we can't depend on Cozzy and Fritsch kicking 6 and 5 goals to win a game.
Big out McInerney for them, which might help with
that's true.
In that space, because maybe like Max will. I mean, hopefully Max will play more ruck time, and that means Jackson can go back and be that tall forward, and that's a much better setup, I reckon, with McInerney out and Gawn hopefully getting more ruck time. It should give us a huge advantage in clearances.
So they had to use McStay as the ruckman for most of the day, but presumably
which,
they'll
funnily
bring
enough,
in,
I thought worked pretty well for him.
Yeah, but they'll probably bring in Darcy Fort to see the other guy.
Yeah.
But before we go into opposition watch, D's Nuts, finally, he says, can adversity bring a certain strength? We've got injury niggles. We're just lost on our own turf, looking at a steep climb ahead to have any chance at the flag. What can the coaches do to mentally prepare the team for what looks like a very difficult few weeks after what was a very difficult year? And I'm not sure my 2 esteemed co-hosts are psychologists. They don't have any degree in the matter, so I don't know. Can you answer? What can
Resilience,
we
baby.
do?
Resilience.
Yes.
Resilience.
Do some guided meditation perhaps during the week and try and get back on track. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what they can do
But
to
he
mentally
does
prepare.
touch on something that I think is that it fits with the Goody sort of. I mean, I guess this is a bit of a trope in footy, isn't it? But the us against the world, backs against the wall, that type of thing.
That sounds like a Bulldogs narrative, doesn't it?
Che Guevara, I think, is. I mean, look, we're in the semi, aren't we? And we're favourites. We win this week, and there'll be a whole different discussion about where we're at the following week. Where as Lever said, as George said, and as you said at the top, we win 3 games and we win the flag.
We have another. We're going to opposition watch now. And we have another couple of questions that relate to the Lions' tactics coming up against us for the 3rd time this season, and then one about our own tactics. So, John Demonic asks, could we expect a few surprises thrown up by Fagan to test us tactically? If you were Fagan, what would you do? He's got another question, but you can answer that. Is there anything that you would do if you were Fagan? Or do you think he'll just do what he did in the last game?
Well, if I was Fagan, I'd take some of Longmire's, take a page out of Longmire's book and put some time into Salem. I thought, and Langdon as well. Absolutely. If I was thinking about that question, is that I think that their best bet is, it sounds a bit contradictory, but is to keep going fast. That's what's beaten us this year, is to take the risks. And as George said, some days it works, some days it doesn't, some days your opposition is down. They tried to do that in the, we stopped the corridor kick, took that completely away against them a couple of weeks ago. But for me, tactically, that's what I'd be looking to do, is to go fast as crazy and to look to put the score on the board. The problem is, as George has noted, is their defensive system. If they go fast, like I was saying before, it opens it up. But they don't really have a tempo game, and that slow game feeds into the way we want to play. And a slow game exposes their defence as well. So, I think either way, we match up super well against this team. I'm not as confident about this game as I was about the Brisbane game, ironically, even though it's on our home deck, only because it feels like they've got a free hit almost. Like they'll come in a bit freer, and I wonder whether that freedom, they've won. They've got the monkey off the back a little bit. They've got their finals win under this coaching regime, this current team. So maybe they'll play with some freedom. And in footy, as George was saying, if you get on a roll, suddenly you kick 3-4 goals, your opposition miss. The game can swing your way. So I think that will help them, and we'll be under a fair bit of pressure. When we're playing, to go out in straight sets in front of our home crowd would be something the club would be obviously aghast at. So, it sets up differently to that round 23 game.
I think the biggest thing Fagan could do is leave Mitch Robinson out of the side.
He started, didn't he, against Richmond?
Yeah, he did. He was awful.
They've got Rayner coming back in, and they've got Answorth coming back in, so presumably he'll go out.
Yeah.
The next question from John, even if something has served us well in the past, going back to it again and again might be the fastest track to elimination, given our opponents are adaptable and can prepare for it. Are there some positional or tactical changes that we could make to what we did in round 23 to ensure that we get the win again?
I mean, they might tag a different player than Bailey, because last time they looked to put Brayshaw on Bailey. Maybe they'll.
Well, that's our next question. Singer says, last time we played the Lions, we chose not to tag Lachie Neale and instead put a bit of time into Zach Bailey. We know that Neale gets a lot of the footy, in particularly in finals. Do you think we might spend a little bit of time on him instead? So,
yeah, I mean, I thought Harms, again, that was right in front of me, that incident. I thought as soon as it happened, I thought weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm very pleased he's ready to go. I personally would, again, who knows, this is what I would do. I'd definitely put Harms onto, or maybe Brayshaw onto Neale, because Neale was phenomenal in that Richmond game.
Yeah.
He's such a good footballer, and he can hurt.
he played
that-
he played quite a bit of game time as well, and then right at the end he saved with that tackle. He's just got a tank on him
He
too.
was just brilliant. Yeah.
It'll be interesting because Richmond didn't put any time into Neil, and I don't think they're capable of doing it. You mentioned Dustin Martin and his lack of influence. Cochin's not far behind as well. They're well past their prime. Edwards is about to retire, and all of a sudden, someone like Lockie Neal has an absolute blinder. I don't think he's going to get the same degree of freedom with a Petrarca and a Viney and an Oliver sitting around him.
Yeah.
Richmond were pretty ordinary in the middle at the end of the day. So, but when a guy's he had some phenomenal number of clearances in one of the quarters. I think it was 8 clearances. Ridiculous.
9 or 10.
You would think a coach would say, no, we need to put someone on him. If he starts to show that sort of same output, then you will see a Harms or a Brayshaw go to him around the ground at least, if not in the middle.
Yeah, but I mean, having said all of that, probably the most likely scenario is that they won't change anything and force Brisbane's hand to try and. I mean, Brisbane will know what we'll do. We know Goody sticks with what's worked, and maybe some small tweaks, and respond to what they do.
Yeah.
Or force them to respond to how we're setting up.
Certainly, we targeted Bailey in the last game in the same way that we target McRae when we're playing against, because they're the dangerous ones on the outside who deliver the ball. You don't worry about whether the guy gets the ball in the middle; it's what he does with it. And
you saw that in the Brisbane Tigers game, how dangerous Bailey can be if he gets a bit of time and space on the outside. He's a good kick. He's a smart user. Maybe they'll set up exactly as they did 2 weeks back.
Well, let's hope we get a big win and I can enjoy myself at the footy. Let's quickly, we'll go through AFLW. Our women fought out a tough, low-scoring 2-point game as a curtain raiser to our qualifying final. They remain undefeated after 2 games. George, what can you tell me about the match? I only managed to catch the last few minutes. It was a bit of a busy time for me getting to the game.
Yeah, it was a strange sort of match. North Melbourne are a very good side. And we had control of the game, and in a similar sort of problem to the men, we kicked 3 goals, 8 to 4 goals, just to get
the demon spirit.
It is whatever it is. Our inability to score in front of goal was a problem last year, and it's starting to raise its ugly head again this year, and certainly in this game, although they've only played the 2 games. It was a completely different style of play from the Adelaide game, which was messy, far more physical, the Adelaide game. This was a really messy game. Libby Birch down back was awesome. Just fantastic. Yeah, she had 4 intercept marks in the third quarter alone. I was disappointed again in Stanier. He's gone back to the handball method of moving the ball. It took him 6 games last year to stop doing it. We look fantastic when the ball is kicked long and hard. When you've got the players now, Karen Paxman was just superb.
She was fantastic. She's wing again, wasn't she?
She's wing. Yeah.
She was by far the best on the field.
She runs with the ball before she kicks it, and then she kicks it 50 metres. And
Zanka was doing something similar too. So I thought Zanka had a good game.
You need to adapt to the way the game has adapted and the way the players have adapted over the years. It's not the same sort of game, and the handballs were causing the errors. We let them into the game simply because we kept making these errors. Hanks in the middle was just superb again. Eliza West has stepped up something amazingly.
She set up that winning goal. Kicked to herself, basically, almost marked her own kick.
Yeah, she started in the middle of the ground and was finished up at the other end. Fortunately, Bannon was able to drag it around the corner to win the game. But yeah, she was fantastic. Maddie Gay down the back line were again helping out Libby Birch, but she had a knee problem in the third. She came back on. It was amazing. In the third quarter, the stats came up. We had 92 handballs, and North had only had 49. I'm asking Mr. Stanier to just concentrate on kicking the ball when we've got the opportunity, when we've got the players like Paxman and like Taylor, who can kick the ball long distances, and Talia Gillard can kick it long distances as well in the back line. Utilise those capabilities rather than reverting to what you were trying to do 5 and 6 years ago, simply to get the ball up the ground. I'd also like him to move Daisy back up the ground. Unfortunately, she's not what she used to be.
Nah, she's not. She's not.
She got a couple of cheap goals. She's got great skills at knowing where the ball's going to go and being able to out-position players. Her greatest skills would be on the half-back line, where she reads the play so beautifully.
She's not. I don't think she's quick enough. She's outpointed at one point pretty badly, and it wouldn't have happened too many times in her career. I don't think she was outread and outbodied in the marking contest.
Yeah, but I think she's just being wasted in the forward line, especially when the ball doesn't go down there all that often. Maybe play her off the bench and halfback role and things like that a bit more often. But I think she's wasted. Just leave Elisa Bannon down the forward line. For somebody else to worry about. But we still got to win. That's all that matters. Like I said, North Melbourne are a good side. They've been consistently in finals over the last couple of years, and now we've got 2 wins on the board. So it's off to a good start.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you to Bigfoot, CYB, Dominion, Buck Naked, Lazy, At the Break of Gone, Kelpian, Watson 11, John Demonic, Detective Sergeant Taggart, Executioner, Everything's a Blur, Oh My D's, Demonized, Rab D, Nesbitt, Gibroni, Guga. Yes, it was a win for the ages. Demon WA, Doug Reamer, D's Nuts, Singer, Demon Dynasty. Thank you to Kieran from Canberra for calling in again. Thank you to Matt from Caulfield for leaving a message. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman. And thank you, our loyal listeners. George, you are motioning to say something.
Yeah, just one last thing. Thank you to Megs, who wrote the pre-match and the post-match report for the women's side. So thank you again.
Yes, and thank you to you, George, for doing a wonderful job on the match reports that come in. I don't know how you do it, George. You get it in so quick. I'm still at the point where I don't even want to look at anything to do with the Demons, and you're writing up a whole report that is just amazing. So thank you very much for your service.
I haven't been able to bring myself to watch any of the footy shows again. So it's like, come on, D's, win this week.
And I'm still not as fast as Joe Boy, who has it in on the website within 30 seconds, I reckon, of the game finishing.
Oh, that's the
well done to him as well.
The three-word
analysis.
Who actually, I saw one of Fox Footy or someone like that started doing that on their Twitter account. I think they copied him. Anyway, thank you everyone that I mentioned, and thank you guys. And we'll be back next week. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!